Welcome to True House Stories. I'm your host, Lenny Fontana, coming out of New York City. And I'm blessed to do something I enjoy doing, is bringing a legendary classic producer, DJ, business entrepreneur, because that's what you have to be in today's day and age. A jack of all trades, a master of many. He hails from the south region of England, London and Lower. He's a Brixton boy. Bred, built his brick and mortar in London. But here's how it goes. Check this out. You know, we always say we found Jesus through music, right? This man was a banker. So around 1982, got a chance to start working with another major name, and his name was Tim Westwood. And he started opening up for Tim Westwood. And you start working your chops, and that music bug kicks in. And then you start scratching your head like I'm doing. You go, am I going back to that bank tomorrow? And what happens is you start singing that song. I'm working 9 to 5. And I had enough of making this living. He found music as his living. Took it from a DJing career. It spans over 4 decades. That's a long time. And you know what? He's still got a lot to say. He's made his name in techno, but played other genres in house music. Radio presenter when Kiss was in Kiss London as a pirate station. His voice became familiarized around the London area. You would hear that DJ. And I'm going to bring him up right now. I like to welcome to the stage Mr. Colin Dale. Yes.
Hey, what's up,
Yes.
Lenny? Wow, that's quite an introduction.
Yes. Colin
Fantastic.
Dale. 4 decades and still telling the story. Still telling the story. God bless you, man. God bless.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're a legend, and legend needs to tell their story. So, before we even get into any questions, how are you doing these
I'm
days?
very good, man. I'm very good. It's starting to get cold here in London, though, as we're approaching Christmas and winter and all that. But I'm in good spirits. I'm an optimistic type of guy. So yeah, plowing on, doing my thing, and keeping on doing what I love to do.
And that's important that you're doing the keeping on. So let's get into this story because people want to hear the nitty gritty. Now, I know you've done other interviews, but my interviews get to dissect your life. And no one tells that story better than the person that lived it with their paintbrush. And your paint colors are the day to day that we all go through. So, as a young child, pre banking and pre going to college and wanting to be a TV technician.
Wow,
Ah,
wow, you've delved deep.
you got that, mate. I went like this. I pulled the skins off. Okay, I went like this. I looked
Wow,
in the lid. Okay, being a TV technician, which maybe you may not have been able to keep going at,
wow.
which is a good thing. So, because you decided not to go that direction, go into banking and all that, how does music find the kid when you with your mom and dad?
Well, my parents are Jamaican. Um, they're from the West Indies, Jamaica. They came over to the UK, to South London, Brixton, in the very early 60s. And as like a lot of Jamaican, West Indian. I think this applies to a lot of different races, not only Jamaican, but my parents were very much into music, kind of reggae music, Motown music, people like Marvin, Stevie, all the big reggae acts and stuff like that. My mum was even into country music as well. So that's how I initially got into music. Every Sunday, my dad, he'd be the one to do the vacuuming. And after he'd vacuumed up, done the whole house, it was a case of him, switching the sound system on. That's if the kids hadn't ruined his styluses, because we've done that so many times. And he'd put music on, and music would be playing throughout the house. And that's my earliest kind of memories and recollection of hearing music early on. Also back then in the early 60s, a lot of people that came over to London from Jamaica used to throw parties every weekend. So one weekend it would be me, the next weekend it would be an uncle, and then so it would work the way through the friends, and that's how my initial introduction to music, I'd say, a very musical house I came from.
You know, it's always interesting that sound system culture plays such an important part in the Caribbean, Jamaica, especially in Jamaica. And I know that goes back to World War II era, that they were actually doing those big sound systems in the street and having people dancing. So that culture's been handed from generation to generation. Did you realize as a young kid, or you were just following what you were seeing as far as putting those type of events together and parties?
No, I didn't. I didn't realize at all. It was a norm to me, and it wasn't only a norm to me. It was a norm to all my friends as well. A lot of my West Indian friends came from a similar background. But in saying that, I had friends from lots of different backgrounds: white, London, African, etc. But the addition to that is I came from Brixton as well, and as many people know, Brixton has a very deep and rich musical heritage, especially around the time that I was growing up in the 70s in Brixton, a very musical place, lots of shubbins and lots of places you could go and hear music, both legally and illegally. So it's a great place for music, and it still is to this day as well.
You know, I know that because Brixton is, I don't want to say melting pot, but I want to say it's multicultural, because melting pot to me feels you have to surmise to the institution. I like the idea of people keeping culture. You know, that's important, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing about Brixton is, in Victorian times, Brixton was one of the wealthiest places in London. It was the first place to have electricity with Electric Avenue. They have some of the most amazing Victorian properties in Brixton as well. So it was a very affluent area. And I think things kind of changed, maybe after the war. I'm not really sure when they started to change. But people kind of fled the area, and there was an influx of immigrants, from all over, Irish, West Indian, Jamaican, African, from different parts of Europe and such. So that's the kind of background of Brixton. It was a very affluent place. Then it went through a lot of hardship, I thought, when I was growing up there in the 60s and 70s. And then on to now, where it's kind of been gentrified, and it's one of those places in London that a lot of people want to live, but of course it's a very expensive area now as well.
Tell me, I'm laughing as you're
Mm,
saying that. Tell me in London where it's not expensive in the inner city of London. You know, everything's gotten to the point, that word gentrified.
mm.
It's crazy. It's what used to be so affordable is not affordable anymore, you know?
That's right. I mean, even places like Peckham, um, which a few years back, people used to mock Peckham in TV programs and stuff like that. Now, Peckham's one of those places that has been gentrified, and another one of those places that people really want to live, and also has a great kind of underground kind of club music and arts culture there in Peckham as well. There's lots of really great venues there and stuff like that.
So now, take us on the journey through school and your thinking as far as, the weekends are reggae oriented and culturally Caribbean. And then
Mm,
you're dealing with the English institution at the schooling. Um, and at that time, when you're talking about the 70s and 80s, the parliament had a massive control over you guys as far as, how they wanted it to be.
mm,
There's no such thing as free speech, free this. You have to basically constride in the means that they offer you. So
mm.
tell us about your journey through life to getting to that point.
Well, I wish I could really glam up those times and make them sound really good, but they weren't all good. There was a lot of depressing times as well. Of course, like I said, I came from Brixton, and we had the Brixton riots because of how the police were treating the black youths. I experienced it myself, getting arrested for absolutely no reason at all, just because I was stood near a shop window looking at something, and got arrested for that, believe it or not. So it was a very hard kind of time, both politically and how it was policed at the time. If you were a black youth, it was a hard time. I mean, thankfully for me, I didn't really encounter like really heavy racism too much. I mean, we had scraps with skinheads, which were kind of the norm if you were black and heading into the West End, and you were like me, young, just being yourself, really. But there were loads of times we were heading into West End and had scraps with skinheads. I mean, skinheads used to walk the streets freely back then. I mean, thank God we don't see them as much now. But yeah, that's how it was back then. And like I said, I wish I could glamorize it and make it sound a lot better than it was. But I want to be really, really real here. It was a tough time. The politics were really tough as well. We had Thatcher Britain at the time. So lots of industries closing. Financially, it was a hard time for many people going back then.
So you're
So
trying to put us in a position with Margaret Thatcher, who ruled England with a iron arm, as they call it, the iron fist. Um,
that's right. So don't get me wrong. She worked for some people, but she didn't work for everybody. And yeah, unfortunately, she didn't work for me or for the likes of me or for a lot of working class people back then. So it was a tough time, until it did change though, going into the 80s, but the 70s were very, very much like that.
Musically speaking, at the time when you were in school, were you training in any musical education as far as instruments or singing, any of that stuff?
I was indeed. I mean, unfortunately for me, I was always at the back of the list when it came to getting to choose a musical instrument. So the musical instruments I played back then were a violin. I played a French horn. Violin and French horn were the two instruments I played at school. Later on, I bought a alto saxophone, which unfortunately I couldn't learn much because I couldn't play it in the house because the sound just filled the whole house. So yeah, at school, violin and French horn were my thing back then.
Thankfully, you did take some musical education because not knowing later, because technology wasn't there yet at that time. Um, Band and orchestra was the first primary goal of life at that time. To do the best you can with the instrument. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, back when we're going back this far, I must have been about 14. There was no inclination of doing anything music related professionally. It was just like a hobby, and it was the thing that most kids done back then was pick up an instrument that they liked and played it. So there was no kind of forward thinking of doing it professionally back then.
was there How important did radio play in your life at that time, and television? you know?
Do you know what? That I remember finding this radio station that was absolutely instrumental in my whole musical outlook when I was I must have been about 12 or 13. And I was always fascinated with radio. And I remember one day coming across a radio station called Radio Luxembourg. And they, on a Friday and Saturday night, played kind of American music, kind of disco music. Maybe it was a disco chart or something like that. And it really exposed me to loads of fantastic music that I wasn't hearing on local radio stations. So early on, that Radio Luxembourg it was like mind blowing for me, hearing all this American music that I didn't have access to before. So that early on was quite inspirational.
So disco was a big thing around you at that time then, would you say?
Oh yeah, yeah. Maybe this was pre-disco. Really, it was like funk and soul music. I was heavily into disco music as well. This was around the time that I was 16 and stuff like that. Really got into disco music heavily, and it was around this age that I consciously kind of made it my number one music. I wasn't listening to so much reggae. I don't know if it was because it was what my parents listened to, and I wanted to move on. But I became a soul boy pretty much when I was 16. I pierced my ear on the day I left school, and I declared myself a soul boy into soul funk and disco music. That was my thing.
Who were the champions, or should I say the muses, that at that time, being that you now have proclaimed yourself in that scene? Who are you following?
The usuals. I mean, back then was really into Michael Jackson, people like Funkadelic, Earth, Wind and Fire, all the funk groups, Brass Construction, Fatback Band, Cameo was absolutely massive. Pleasure, these kind of funk bands that were kind of really, really big and coming through in the 80s. Most of them American. And I guess this was around the time that jazz funk really hit, and so we started getting a lot more UK acts on board. I seem to remember happening when I was around 16, 17, and that whole jazz funk thing hit. And then I really got into listening to English funk and soul music as well, because they were kind of really kind of starting to get up there with the Americans, but had a slightly different sound.
Are we like talking like the Players Association?
Exactly. Stuff like that, I worshipped Players Association, Chris Hills, the head guy, and that, and sourced out all his early albums when I really got into it. So yeah, people like Players Association were absolutely massive, and that whole plethora of funk and soul groups that were coming through from the States as well.
So now, being that you have the soundtrack, where do you find yourself on the yellow brick road going to the first club or party that you say, "Oh my God, this is outrageous"?
This is actually really really funny. My first time out, really hearing club music properly, hearing it loud and stuff like that, wasn't actually me going to a club. It was actually my father saying to me, there was an adventure playground around the back of our house, and on a Friday and Saturday night, they used to have a sound system in there and sell drinks and stuff like that. It was all very local. And I remember going there, and they had a sound system, and the guy there was playing all this kind of soul, funk, and disco music that I loved. So this was my first experience of hearing it really loud, and it was at this moment I really got into dancing, because when I started to go to clubs, dancing was my real thing. I used to hang around with Fabio, and we'd go to clubs together, and dancing was our thing, a way to, look good in front of the girls, and that was the thing.
And I try to explain that to everybody. If you want to mingle and you want to hook up in those days, you had to dance.
Oh, absolutely, man.
Mate, right?
Absolutely.
Tell the story. Come on. You-
Absolutely. I mean, I also come from a time when there were loads of dance troupes. Dance troupes were another thing that were really big. You might have heard of the Pasadenas. They were local friends of mine and lived in the same area. There was Trevor Shakes, an unknown quantity, John Riley with another great dance troupe, myself, Fabio, and my brother Trevor. We had the dance troupe called Freebase. And so, yeah, dance troops back then were really the thing. Get into a club, get your space, and if you're really good, everyone would stand around you and watch, or you'd battle another dance troupe, maybe from another area. I mean, it was all very friendly and that, but it was just a fantastic way for me to get introduced to clubbing because I love dancing so much.
See what I'm saying? I've said this over and over in other interviews, and I've talked about this with other people. Those those battling. It was a war on the dance floor, but there was no fighting. It was all love. All love.
No, no fighting. In fact, it's funny you say that, Lenny, because thinking back to those times, there was not much fighting that I remember going on in clubs, especially around that those sort of days. All the battling, all the arguments, and everything like that was solved on the dance floor. You shook hands afterwards, gave each other respect, and that was it. Not much trouble.
Did your parents push you? If you were to tell them, "Hey guys, mom, dad, I want to go into music full time," would they be of understanding that that could be a career, or did you have to go down the old road, which is I got to go to college, I have to get my education, or I have to be trained technically?
Mm,
Because that era, there was nothing like this back then. You know,
mm,
this type of world we live in today. Back then, it was, music was a outlet to enjoy, but
mm.
not to make money from.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. My initial plan when I was 16 was to carry on my studies and prolong my education. Wasn't sure what I really wanted to do. You brought up a television engineer earlier on, and that was actually one of the things I wanted to do because I thought to myself, we're always going to have televisions and people are going to always want their televisions fixed, blah, blah. But how wrong was I? Because people just throw away their TVs nowadays, on the whole. So what happened at 16, I went for an interview. It was actually the first interview that I'd ever went for, and it was for Barclays, working in the city. And I'd always been quite relatively smart at school, in the top tier of the class. So I went for the interview and I actually got the job, which was a real surprise. I mean, my parents were absolutely blown away. So yeah, I got the job at Barclays, but after spending a couple of years there, it gave me enough money to really go out and explore club life, to dress myself how I wanted to dress, and I found myself getting really sucked into club life. And it was here that I met Tim Westwood. Of course, but by this time, I'd started to amass music, buy records, lots of records. I was totally obsessed with buying music. And Tim found out that I had a good a good record collection, but I'd already started doing community radio, pirate radio, even hospital radio. I was obsessed, just wanted to share this music. So that was my initial club gig with Tim Westwood
So
early
I'm
on.
just I'm
Yeah,
grinning and laughing a little bit. So
yeah.
bank crime fighter by day, nightclubber slash radio personality by night.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. And after doing both of them for about 6 months, the banking had to take a back seat, primarily because I wasn't getting paid a fortune, but I was earning as much as I was DJing as I was at the bank, which shows you how little I was actually earning in the bank at the time. But so yeah, I decided that I'd not so much embark on a career of DJing. It was very short term. The way I was looking at it then, I thought, yeah, I'll get into DJing for a bit. I knew a lot of the right people. That Gordon Mack, which I'm sure we'll touch in on later on. I was going to all the clubs, and that was my initial way I got into DJing.
With the skills of DJing and personality on the radio, any formal training, or is this just something that you just picked up and worked on your own?
I actually went to a radio production kind of class, but it was very kind of aimed at more at the BBC side rather than anything else. I guess it helped me in a way. It's hard to say, but that was the initial training that I had really.
So was it more like, "Good evening, welcome to the BBC. Today we're
Yeah,
going to be
yeah,
doing,"
exactly, exactly.
you know what I'm
And
saying? Like, no excitement, just like
exactly. The other thing about when I joined Kiss FM, actually, I remember Gordon saying, don't open your mic unless you've got something to really say. He didn't necessarily wanting us sounding. He wanted us to sound sophisticated. This is how it came across to me, and kind of next level. Even when we were pirates, we had much more professional sound than a lot of the other pirate stations that were around. And we must remember, it wasn't only Kiss that was around at that time. There must have been about 5 or 6 really quite good big pirates at that time. But because Kiss was a little bit different, they had fantastic presenters at Kiss. Every single presenter was great, top notch. They all knew their music. It's as if Gordon handpicked each one, and he picked them perfectly.
so your background at that time was still, I'm going to say, R&B, jazz, funk. You're playing out all that stuff in the clubs. Pre
That's right. Around this time, we're sort of talking mid 80s, so it's still soul and funk. But I remember the funk I was listening to back then. I got really into the when it changed and went from acoustic instruments to a more kind of electronic sound. I was really into that as well. That change in sound. It sounded more futuristic to me and more up to date, for want of a better word. So I was really, really into that kind of that switch, that change that happened in the mid 80s
be-
with that sound.
because as far as I always thought, when you think of Tim Westwood, you think of hip hop,
Yeah.
R&B, hip hop. I don't really think of jazz and funk. So hearing you
This is
part of
before. I mean, this
something,
is even before Tim had, dipped his toe into any kind of hip hop music. Tim was playing soul. He has an incredible soul, funk, jazz background. That's where he actually come from, and that's what he was playing when I went to work with him at Gossips.
and see, that's what people don't really know, that because
Mm,
they only
for
know
sure.
how what's happening now. So it's interesting to hear that there was that going on at that time, because again, even the styles of music that we hear today, they didn't exist back then. You know,
That's
fundamentally,
right.
James Brown is part of our DNA. All that's coming up, disco,
Yeah,
true R&B. That stuff that we talk about. George Clinton with Parliament.
exactly.
So step by step, you're doing it and showing a ubiquity of sounds that you grew up with to a whole new audience through
Mm,
radio. So I guess because you're moving around and now you're becoming the favorite around town, Gordon Mack is a excellent, I wouldn't want to say breeder, but he's a purveyor of finding fantastic talent,
yeah,
put things together. And he's been part of the show as well. We had him as well because he is another legend.
I saw that one.
Who became a BBE? He got his BBE, right? BBM.
I think he did. Yeah, yeah, just
Yes,
recently, about a year ago,
sir,
I think.
Sir
Yeah,
Gordon Mack.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
like Sir Norman J. Right. So,
That's right.
um, pirating again. The funny part of this whole story is if you pirated in America a station like that, everybody would have got locked up, guaranteed.
Yeah, well, they did. They were trying to lock us up. That was their aim. Take our gear and not so much lock us up, but give us some serious fines. Take your gear. They didn't. On some cases, they didn't come round your house and take your gear there as well. So it was. There were heavy penalties to pay if you got caught. But we had a great engineer at Kiss FM. We hardly ever got caught. And whereas they might take our transmitter, I don't think we ever had our studios raided. Not that I remember anyway. And yeah, our engineer was fantastic. Don't quote me on this, but I think he went on to work at Radio 1 after Kiss FM.
The reason why, because he was so damn good, they needed to take.
Exactly. I could be wrong, but I remember hearing that.
You know, how does one find their way from funk and all that to techno, which I know it's a slow progression, and I know as Kiss was coming up, house music was starting to come up.
Mm,
The same, it's like six in one hand, a dozen in the other.
yeah. Well, around looking back, I've been really kind of blessed with the whole way that things have progressed and worked out, because it was around that time I started to work in a record shop. I worked in various record shops in London. I even worked in record shops with Trevor Mad Hatter, with Carl Cox, with Luke Slater, Richie Rich, who made Salsa House, and loads of others. I think people would be really surprised to know those guys used to work in record shops as well. So I was working in a great record shop. It was called My Price, which went on to be the famed Swag Records after that in Croydon. So I'm there working in My Price, and these house releases just started to come in, and I thought to myself, wow, this is the music I'm really into. And it pretty much started from there. I kind of dropped the soul and funk thing. It seemed, looking back now, it seemed like overnight, pretty much. And I used to do a soul and funk club with Paul Anderson, Bobby and Steve. We used to do a boogie club. I remember I started dropping house tracks there, such was my passion for house music. So pretty much once I come across house, that was it. I really knew that was what I was into. And the whole techno, I got into the whole techno thing when it was Kevin Saunderson, Blake Baxter, and what's his name? Derek May came over to promote that very first Detroit techno album. And I caught them at Legends in the West End of London. It's the first time I'd seen anyone from Detroit play. And that was another moment which was like a eureka moment in like, wow, that is the music I'm into. What they were doing, the spin backs, the whole cutting up and very animated on the decks and all that, working the EQ. And that was inspirational for me. And that's really how I got into the more techno side of things back then, through watching those guys. And this was on their very first visit to the UK as well.
Let me think. This has to be around 87, 88.
I'm gonna guess it's like early 88. I'm at a guess. It might be late 87, but it was that very first
Somewhere around
techno
there, right?
album. Huh?
Somewhere around there. It's like
Around there, yeah, definitely no later than 88. And it was the first really big Detroit techno album, gatefold album, and yeah, changed my life pretty much.
because you're doing those parties with Trouble and Bobby and Steve, and you're dropping the house tracks. Is this pushing you now to play it in other places and start pushing the sound, or was it that it was just catching on with other DJs and everybody said, you know what, this is the music now we're going with?
There was, I mean, a lot of people might be really surprised, but not everyone. There was a lot of pushback against it, especially from the guys that were playing soul funk. Because let's not forget, Rare Groove was pretty much at its peak when the house music first hit. So yeah, there was a lot of pushback. Some people are, you either got really into it from the off, or a lot of the guys that you're watching now actually took a year or two to get into it in a lot of cases, sometimes even more. But there were other people that, got into it, straight away. On Kiss FM, there's myself, Colin Favor was quick on it, Steve Jackson, Danny Ramplin, Judge Jules, even Judge Jules was a little bit later on getting into it. So yeah. But me personally, I played it everywhere. I pretty much stopped playing soul and funk clubs and just went with the whole house and techno thing. But let's not forget, this is just at the start before it really, really, really explodes.
Well, there's four guys that come back from Ibiza, and everybody knows that story. You mentioned Rampley
Exactly.
doing his parties, Nicky
Trevor
Holloway doing
Funk,
his
yeah,
party, Oak
Trevor,
Cole doing his thing, and they're
that's
all coming
right.
back from Ibiza with, I want to take this thing what we saw in Ibiza and bring it home to London.
Yeah. But you know what? I knew all those guys you mentioned, Oakenfold, Coxey, Trevor Fung. I don't think I met Danny back then, but those three, I actually knew them from my soul and funk days. There was a little club called Ziggy's in Streatham that those three used to play at, and that's where I first met them. I must have been about 18 or 19 when I first hooked up with all of those guys. Coxey, Trevor Rockcliffe was another one I met from back then, and all the Fung crew, because there isn't just one Fung. It's like a whole crew of the Fung family. So I hooked up with those guys as well.
So give us the idea what Ziggy's was like, because people don't know this. Like, you got to tell you through your eyes. Tell us what, because Ziggy's becomes like high school for this music thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Trevor told you about Ziggy's when you interviewed him recently, but Ziggy's it was a tiny, tiny, tiny little club, and this is in soul and funk days, and it was one of the only places in that area, Brixton, Streatham, that you could hear this music really, and so all the DJs used to congregate and do sets there, which was great. And moving on a couple of years after that, there was a place called Mendoza's, which was another place in Brixton, which was really instrumental for bringing DJs through, like myself, Fabio and Groove Rider went through there, Dave Angel, Brian G was another one, Jumping Jack Frost. All these DJs come out of the same area and they were all friends and they all came out of this place called Mendoza's, which was basically like an illegal damp cellar club, really is the best description I could give to it. But yeah, it was a start of so many things, so many DJs. The start of that whole drum and bass thing that came out of there. So instrumental places, both Ziggy's and Mendoza's in Brixton.
And I'm going to presume at that point you actually can see that this thing is catching on, because you mentioned about 6, 7, 8 DJs right there that were all branching out to do different scenes, coming from like the original, the egg and the chicken making more chickens. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah,
more eggs,
yeah.
and people want to tell their story. And what you're experiencing at these clubs, and you're all mingling and you're talking over drinks, but you can't help to hear what's going on and see the reaction of the people. It's changing the course of, let's put it like this, what could have not have happened. you know
Yeah, I mean, you know what, Lenny? Looking back now, when you're in it and something's taking off like that, you don't. When you're in it and you're rolling with it, sometimes you don't know how big it is because you're so wrapped up in it and involved in it. So you're seeing it from a different perspective. But this thing just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I started traveling and traveled all over the world many, many times, playing this music and stuff. And I would never, ever have thought that those little DJ sets and those little cellar clubs that I played would have taken me so far, and never, ever, ever thought that 40 years later that I'd still be involved in this music.
Here's the first question of the traveling DJ, the international DJ. You never forget the first time you left to go somewhere. Where was that, and how did that go?
I totally, totally, totally remember it. I was with a group called GTO. Oh God, sadly the girl's dead now, and the guy, I can't remember his name, and I should do because I know him really well. Name escapes me right now. And they had been traveling for years and years and years, and I went out to do a festival in Germany. I can't remember the name of the festival, but it was one of the really big, massive ones. And I remember sitting on the plane, and my mind was blown that I was actually traveling overseas and getting paid well to go and play music. It was like crazy. Getting adoration and. Yeah, it still blows my mind to this day that I'm doing something that I love so much, and more importantly, something that I've kind of curated and explored and done for myself, really primarily. It's just incredible to think that I'm still doing it, and I still have a massive, massive, massive passion for it.
When you were in Germany at that time, the tempo of music in techno was a lot faster than now.
Mm.
Can you
Well,
explain the difference of what techno is then to what techno is and developed now?
I tell you what, Lenny, I think you'd be really surprised in that because I listen to a lot of techno channels like Whore in Berlin. I think it's one of the biggest ones at the moment for like straight up techno DJs, like young ones as well. And they're pretty much playing the same tempo that we were playing back in 1993. if not faster. Your 140 BPM, 145 BPM was around what I was playing in what I called the rave, the rave kind of techno gigs. But there's still in a lot of the kids, especially in Germany, Berlin, stuff like that, they're actually playing a similar type of techno now.
Yeah, because for a moment there, I mean, I was hearing techno and it sounded like deep house. You
Well,
know?
this is the type of techno I love, really. I call it techno. Other people would call it deep house, and I think there's this big divide actually in that music. Because you've got techno, what I call straight up technos, 140 BPM upwards. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And then there's another side which is more groovy. Some techno people would say it sounds more like deep house, but it's just it's just a very techie music. But I wouldn't necessarily call it straight up techno. To be fair, some would even describe it as real tech house, really, because it is a 50% of one side and 50% of the other techno side. So, I mean, it also shows us how broad this umbrella of techno music really is now, that it can go from 128 right up to GABA speeds, essentially. And I know about that GABA thing because in my whole musical exploration, I actually took it up to that level, and that's when I started to back off. Is as if I'd explored as far as the limits, as far as I could, and then I started to like come back a bit. Now my tempo's around 128, 130, 132. I'm not sure I describe it really much as techno. I call it deep tech because I think um, it's not really full on techno. People expect techno to have these really fast driving BPMs a lot of the time.
Take us on the journey to what every DJ surmises their life to be. They say, oh, well, I shouldn't say every DJ, but most DJs see the bigger picture as this thing starts to grow about going into a studio and becoming part of not only being the entertainer, but also the person that is entertaining the entertainer through the music.
Yeah, for sure. Especially nowadays with the way technology's gone, it's a lot more accessible for DJs to try their hand at making music. For me, it came about because I kind of felt it was expected of me. Everyone was like, "Oh, what? Why are you not making music?" It was kind of the same with the record label as well. Why haven't you got a record label? It's like these things are rightly or wrongly, it kind of expected of DJs nowadays that you produce as well, and that you have a record label. And I'll be the first to say, not every DJ should be a producer. And it's kind of the reason we've got so much crap dance music at the moment, is that everyone thinks because they've got the equipment that they can make music, and it's definitely not the case. Getting really technical and getting really skillful and knowing how sound works, how the equipment works, and getting really deep into the technicality of it all is where I think it really is. And a lot of DJ producers don't do that. I'm not saying I'm A1 and right up there amongst above everyone else. Certainly not. But I definitely don't think every DJ should be a producer.
So you feeling there's a quality control issue?
Oh, absolutely. Anyone can go and start a record label nowadays, or buy, get some cracked software and start to make music. we had quality control years back where you had to go out and spend hundreds or thousands of pounds on gear and do a certain amount of learning before you know you've done anything credible. So that was the whole quality control back then. I'm not saying that all the music was great because it definitely wasn't, but it certainly helped with the whole kind of QC thing. Because I tell you what, Lenny, because I used to work in a record shop, I pretty and because I did my radio show as well, I pretty much listened to every promo, even if it's for a split second, a second, 2 seconds that I get. So I can definitely tell you there's a lot of crap music out there.
That's important, to be a proper selector and checking the hunt for
Yeah,
the
yeah,
hunt was the thing back then.
yeah, yeah. It still is, even with me playing digital and that hunt, you know, for the tracks, you know, tracks that no one or hardly anyone's playing. And it's funny now because a lot of DJs I speak to don't kind of think that way. They don't listen to everything. And so I think I've actually got a bit of an advantage by listening to everything because you pick up every so often, you'll just pick up a gem. You know, it could be every day or every 2 days. You know, you keep sifting through, and I don't mind doing it. I actually see that whole sifting through music part of my job, really, and I'm so used to doing it from working in a record shop, constantly just listening for music.
The hunt for the new song. But
Sure.
I just have a personal problem with today's release schedule. I think
In what way?
it's just we're all inundated with too much now. Too many records and not many good ones. There's a lot of frills that you got
Yeah.
to spend a lot of time listening to so much stuff to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, like yourself, Lenny, it's worth it. It's worth it in the end, you know. And I think it's all part of the job.
Oh yeah, I mean, come on, we love what we do. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, my
But let me
friend.
tell you what makes the difference between back in the day and now. Back in the day, you had to make a vested financial interest in doing something. Now, you don't have to have much finances, very small. Like you said, crack software. You just know how to do the social media thing, and that's what you're seeing now. Comparings. Would you do it the same, or would you do it the old way if you had your choice?
What do you mean?
In the
Do it the
sense
same?
of owning a record label and producing, would you do it the way we did it coming up, working our craft to make great records, or would you go the social media way, making
I'd
yourself?
absolutely do it the old fashioned way. The tried kind of it's you know it's the hard long road way of doing it really. But I think it's so much more beneficial to do it that way. I think it's really sad how things have been kind of rooted more into a social media way, which is crazy because you can go out and pretty much buy followers and likes nowadays if you've got enough money to spend on it. So I don't really get how that works. I think it's crazy that we've got a lot of influencers headlining gigs nowadays. Sometimes people that have never even played before, they're just big influencers. I don't really get that. You know, maybe I'm kind of getting old, you know, thinking that way, but I don't get it. I don't get
I
it.
guess from a promoter's position, they see the influence is going to put the bums on the seats. You
I
know,
guess
a lot of
so. I
people,
guess so.
that's it. I can't see any other way of why
I
would
guess so. I've promoted clubs myself, and I didn't think that way. I wanted the guy that was just gonna. I knew instinctively he's gonna rock the dance floor, and even if he didn't have many followers, well, he's got to have a few, otherwise I wouldn't book him. But you know, I certainly wouldn't be going the social media route. if I was gonna do a lineup today,
Sure. Tell me, with the record label, are you putting a lot of time and effort and energy still into that with your DJing? And where do you see this going further into the future?
Yeah, at the moment we're putting a lot of time and energy into it, signing new acts and stuff like that. So and the other thing is next year it's quite an important year for me because I'm actually going to be doing an Abstrakt Dance tour, which I'm sorting out at the moment. So we're going to take that on the road next year, and of course the Abstrakt Dance label is all tied into that. So currently in the background doing a lot of work before we unleash this kind of tour thing next year. So yeah, I put a certain amount of work into it. I mean, it's never enough. I wish I could do more, have more time to devote to it. But I'm happy with the way it's going at the moment. And of course, Abstrakt Dance isn't only um, the record label; it's of course the radio show, the live broadcast that we do as well, that we started doing again a few years back.
And see, you've never gotten away from that radio presenting. Never gotten away from it. What brought you there in the beginning is still past and parcel to now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, with the technology we have nowadays, I can do it from home. I can, yeah, broadcast from home, and technology is a great thing. It's helped me to keep making music. I do the live broadcast once every couple of weeks, which is a kind of carry on from what I was doing at Kiss FM to keep the whole thing alive. And I think it's amazing that I can hit so many people from home as well. I was thinking I'd have to go to a radio station to, hit any proper numbers. But yeah, the numbers are great at the moment. I'm really happy with them.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you, my
I want
man.
to congratulate you on your upcoming Abstrakt tour for next year. You know, um, I'm going to give this last question to you. Is there any ever stopping for you or retiring from this eventually? Or, how do you see this playing out?
Do you know what, Lenny? That's a great question, and I've pondered on that question so many times. I thought at 40 I would have stopped. I thought by 40, and then I got to 40, and I was still loving it, still doing relatively well at 40. I thought the same at 50, and I thought the same at 60, and I'm now 61. And currently, I've got no desire to stop at the moment. That's not saying that I'm never going to stop, but currently, I'm feeling really positive about things that I want to do in the near future, the next year or two. So no plans to stop at the moment. If anything, um, as I feel it could be my last few years in the game, I'm be, pushing on it even harder as time progresses.
Well, no stopping that rocking.
No stopping, my friend.
Follow Colin Dale to the UK and the world. And the Abstrakt label is better than ever. One more release to the next release, and each release will stand out on its own.
Thank
Colin,
you.
you're a gentleman and a scholar, mate. I'm a big fan, always been. Love your radio voice. I remember you when you were on Kiss. I remember I've been watching you and been around. I mean, we don't see each other, but I do watch and I do pay attention closely. So
You know what? Thank you, Lenny. And thank you for bringing me into this amazing kind of group of interviews that you've got at the moment. I've actually been watching them for years, so I'm a big fan of yours as well. I love how you interview. Um, yeah, love it. And like I said, great to be involved in what you do, my friend.
thank you so much. Don't leave us, Colin. And you know, everyone, each and every time I put up something, it's got substance, and Colin Dale is substance. And you know what? He said it right. At 61 years old, there's no reason to stop. So a dream that starts from a banker, he probably at the time when he was pushing coins at the bank and doing all paperwork and stuff, he probably never thought he'd make it to 61 doing this. I
Yeah.
presume you never thought that. No way. Because if you did, I would say you would have had to look in a crystal ball.
Yeah. Too right, my friend. Too right.
So everyone,
Yeah.
keep tuning in to True House Stories. I'm Lenny Fontana, and thank you, Conda. Don't leave us. Take care.